Cathy Engelbart is in some serious hot water after more information is revealed that she sold a percentage of the WNBA.
Cathy Engelbart, the commissioner who once promised to elevate the WNBA into a billion-dollar brand, is now at the center of a firestorm that could cost her everything. Reports have surfaced exposing that she secretly sold a massive stake in the league and possibly tied it to ongoing CBA negotiations without clear transparency about where the money went.
Things could not be getting worse for WNBA Commissioner Cathy Engelbart. It just did, because more people was digging up all type of things that she has been doing. Now, we got several things to talk about in this video. We got Cathy selling a percentage of the league.
Fans are furious. Players feel betrayed, and ownership groups are quietly questioning her leadership. The league she vowed to protect is now being accused of undervaluing itself, while misleading the public about its financial health. What was supposed to be a turning point for women's basketball has instead turned into a credibility crisis that no one saw coming. And when Engelbart tried to defend herself, things only got worse, culminating in a public meltdown that stunned both fans and executives watching around the world.
Now, all of this that's currently going on got shadowed by the WNBA finals, because all of this information came out right before the game started. And, you know, a lot of people kind of sat on this information and pretty much ignored it.
When the story first broke, it didn't just rattle fans, it sent shockwaves through the entire WNBA ecosystem. Cathy Engelbart, who had long branded herself as the steady hand guiding the league into its golden era, was suddenly accused of betraying that very mission. It started quietly with whispers on social media about financial inconsistencies buried deep in public reports. But when journalists from Front Office Sports began digging, the rumors hardened into evidence. They discovered that Engelbart had orchestrated a $75 million capital raise back in 2022, quietly selling a 16% stake in the WNBA.
Now, a lot of people were saying that Cathy may not get fired. From what I'm hearing, she is. And this right here just might be the reason why. Justification. It's the reason why she gets fired. Instead, in 2022, she led a $75 million capital raise, selling a 16% stake in the WNBA in what the league said was an effort to fund the league.
It was supposed to be a win for women's sports, a sign that the league was growing fast enough to attract big money. Engelbart even described it as a transformational investment meant to boost marketing, infrastructure, and player salaries. But the deeper analysts looked, the stranger the math became. The deal placed the WNBA's total valuation at just $468 million, a figure that many experts now say dramatically undervalued the league.
It quickly became clear that the stake with an implied valuation of $468 million dramatically undervalued the league, and questions remain about how the $75 million was invested.
At a time when smaller startups like Unrivaled were securing valuations close to $340 million. With barely a fraction of the audience, the WNBA's sale looked less like growth and more like desperation. The moment those numbers hit the internet, fans and insiders started asking one simple question: why sell such a large portion of the league for so little? Players, already frustrated with low salaries and limited benefits, saw it as a slap in the face. Many wondered how Engelbart could undervalue a league filled with world-class athletes, yet constantly insist there wasn't enough money to pay them more.
So it's looking spooky for Cathy and this whole $75 million investment.
On forums, Twitter threads, and YouTube comment sections, outrage spread fast. Some fans speculated that Engelbart's true goal wasn't growth, it was control. By bringing in select investors who aligned with her circle, she could reshape the WNBA's power structure without needing player approval. As the truth came out, another layer of tension began to unfold. The sale didn't just bring in new money, it changed who actually owned the league. The NBA's 30 owners still held about 42% of the WNBA. Individual team owners held another 42%, and the new investor group, created through Engelbart's capital raise, now controlled the remaining 16%.
The WNBA stakeholders are divided into three groups. The NBA 30 owners controls 42% of the league. The WNBA owners controls another 42%, and the remaining 50% is owned by investors from capital raise. Owners like Ted, Joe whoever, and Herb Simon. That's who currently own the Indiana Fever, all of whom own NBA teams, which WNBA teams and were part of capital raise, now have different stakes in the WNBA. Now, all of this is simply because Cathy decided to sell 16% of this league.
That small number might sound harmless, but in business terms, it gave outsiders enormous influence over decisions that affect players, revenue, and media deals. Once that reality set in, chaos followed. During the WNBA Finals, when Engelbart appeared on stage to present the trophy, the boos were deafening. It wasn't just about the game, it was personal. Fans had seen enough of the league's mixed messaging, and the timing couldn't have been worse. The finals should have been a celebration of progress and talent. Instead, it became a global reminder that something inside the WNBA was deeply broken. And behind the boos was a much bigger question: if Cathy Engelbart could sell off pieces of the league without transparency.
Now, just like I stated in the beginning part, a lot of people don't feel like Cathy's going to get fired. I think she definitely is. And just like I stated, this right here could be grounds to do so. Ben Shea said, "Go be fair. The WNBA landscape has much different in 2022. Now people are chomping at the bit to invest and support." Yes. Now, I would say that, but so right now it's looking spooky. Somebody said, I had a theory days ago, and my first paragraphs made me wonder about how things went from that to this.
After the finals chaos, more details started to leak, and the picture turned darker. What began as whispers about a simple investment spiraled into a full-scale scandal that shook Cathy Engelbart's credibility to its core. The front office sports report laid everything out. The $75 million deal wasn't just a partnership, it was a sale of power. Engelbart had offloaded a 16% stake in the WNBA to outside investors, including names connected to existing NBA franchises, creating conflicts of interest that blurred the line between expansion and exploitation. The problem wasn't only the undervaluation, it was the secrecy. No one outside Engelbart's tight circle seemed to know exactly where the money went. She promised it would modernize the league, but there was little evidence of that in the following seasons. Player marketing didn't noticeably improve, broadcast deals remained limited, and league infrastructure still lagged behind the competition. When reporters pressed for details, Engelbart deflected, saying funds were strategically allocated. That vague phrasing became a meme across sports forums, symbolizing everything fans hated about corporate doublespeak. Behind closed doors, ownership groups were livid. Some claimed they weren't even fully briefed on the specifics of the stake sale until months after it was finalized. To them, it felt like Engelbart had gambled away part of the WNBA's future to make short-term headlines. What she called a capital raise looked to others like a desperate cash grab. And the worst part, the sale tied directly into the ongoing CBA negotiations, where players were already demanding higher pay and greater transparency. By 2024, the tension between the commissioner's office and the players' union was impossible to ignore. Reports surfaced that Engelbart had tried to use the $75 million raise as proof the league was financially disciplined, arguing that valuations didn't yet justify player salaries above a certain limit. But those same numbers contradicted her narrative, especially when rival ventures like Unrivaled secured higher valuations with fewer teams and less exposure. The hypocrisy enraged players, who saw Engelbart as a roadblock to progress rather than a bridge to equality. Public trust began to collapse. Prominent athletes started liking and sharing posts calling out the commissioner's backroom deals. Fans who once defended Engelbart's leadership started demanding her resignation. Even former executives began to speak out anonymously, hinting that Engelbart's obsession with keeping control had blinded her to the league's real potential. Then came the breaking point: an internal memo leaked to the press, revealing that parts of the $75 million were diverted to consulting, initiatives, and brand partnerships that yielded almost no tangible return. Insiders called it throwing money into smoke. Overnight, hashtags like #WhereDidThe75Go began trending across social media. Engelbart, once praised for bringing business discipline to the WNBA, now looked like the face of corporate mismanagement. And just when it seemed she couldn't fall any lower, another revelation emerged. This deal wasn't just about funding. It may have quietly reshaped who truly controlled the WNBA's destiny. Once the financial details came to light, fans and insiders began asking the question no one at the league office wanted to answer. Who actually owns the WNBA now? The answer was far more complicated than anyone expected. After Cathy Engelbart's $75 million capital raise, the league's ownership map became a maze of conflicting interests and overlapping power. What was once a fairly clear structure and BA ownership on one side, WNBA team owners on the other had now turned into a corporate tug-of-war involving private investors, venture funds, and major NBA stakeholders with divided loyalties. At first glance, the breakdown looked simple enough. The NBA's 30-team owners controlled roughly 42% of the WNBA. Another 42% belonged to individual WNBA franchise owners, like Indiana Fever's Herb Simon, who also owned NBA teams. The remaining 16% came from the investor group brought in during Engelbart's capital raise. But that final piece changed everything. Those investors didn't just buy equity, they bought influence. They gained a seat at the table, access to confidential data, and a say in future negotiations that would affect both league governance and the new collective bargaining agreement. This created an internal civil war. The NBA's interest was to protect its brand. The WNBA owners wanted to secure their franchises, and the new investors wanted immediate returns. Engelbart suddenly found herself stuck between three groups with completely different priorities. The NBA expected her to uphold corporate discipline, the team owners demanded autonomy, and the new investors pressured her for profit. Every decision she made from that point forward risked upsetting one side or all three behind the scenes. Sources claimed the board meetings became tense and divided. Longtime owners felt sidelined as Engelbart leaned heavily on investor-backed advisors, some of whom reportedly pushed her to treat the WNBA more like a business startup than a professional sports league. That shift didn't sit well with those who had supported the league through its unprofitable years. One owner allegedly called it a hostile takeover wearing lipstick. For players, the situation was even more frustrating. The ownership confusion meant every conversation about revenue sharing turned into a battle over who even had the authority to approve new terms. One player agent described it as negotiating with a ghost. The league couldn't make meaningful progress on improving pay or working conditions because no one could agree on where the money was coming from, where it was supposed to go. As the drama unfolded, media outlets began digging deeper. They uncovered inconsistencies in how ownership percentages were being reported, and even some question marks around the legal classification of the WNBA's new investors. Was it still a league, or had it become a corporate consortium masquerading as one? The more people asked, the quieter Engelbart became. By now, the narrative had completely flipped. The woman once seen as the league's visionary was now viewed as the architect of chaos. Every press conference, every public statement felt like an exercise in damage control. And as trust crumbled, the league's biggest names began to speak up, hinting that this ownership confusion might not just affect boardrooms, but could soon spill into the locker rooms too. While executives argued over ownership charts and valuations, the players were reaching their limit. For years, they had been told to be patient, that growth takes time, and that big paydays would come once the league reached profitability. But now that the truth was out that Cathy Engelbart had quietly sold part of the league at a cut-rate valuation, patience turned into fury. To them, it felt like a betrayal of everything they had worked for. Players who poured their lives into growing the game suddenly realized the people at the top had been underselling their worth all along. The outrage intensified when reports of the new CBA proposal surfaced. According to Front Office Sports, the proposed supermax salary was around $850,000, with the minimum hovering near $300,000. On paper, it sounded like progress, but players immediately called it insulting. They compared it to the NBA, where rookie bench players earned millions for minimal minutes. Even more infuriating was the rumor that Engelbart had used the $75 million capital raise as a reason to delay significant pay bumps, claiming that funds were needed for infrastructure and marketing. Two players that sounded like the same empty excuse they had been hearing for years. Privately, several WNBA stars began voicing frustration in group chats and union calls. They wanted to know where the money went. How could the league sell expansion slots for $250 million each, bring in new investors, and still claim they couldn't afford million-dollar salaries? Social media erupted with posts comparing the WNBA's supposed financial struggles to the rising valuations of rival leagues like Unrivaled, which had already secured a $340 million valuation with far less exposure. Players began asking if maybe the WNBA wasn't being mismanaged, was being deliberately restrained. The tension boiled over during the finals when Engelbart took the court to hand out the trophy. As boos rained down, cameras caught several players exchanging uncomfortable looks. It was a subtle but powerful moment. The public rejection of the commissioner mirrored what many players felt privately. This wasn't just about one bad deal anymore. It was about an entire system built to silence the athletes while pretending to empower them. The union began pushing harder, demanding full transparency in financial dealings. They wanted access to the league's accounting, including details about the $75 million investment. Engelbart's office refused, citing confidential investor agreements. That phrase alone infuriated players. They had grown the league's audience, brought in sponsorships, and risked their health for every broadcast, but somehow they weren't allowed to see how the profits were divided. The result was a movement unlike anything the WNBA had seen before. Veteran players started warning of a potential lockout if the next CBA didn't include revenue transparency. Younger stars, inspired by the chaos, began speaking openly on podcasts and interviews about how the system was broken. Engelbart's once tight grip on the league was slipping fast, and the players she once counted on to represent the league's unity were now preparing for war. As the players' frustration reached its peak, the collective bargaining agreement talks turned into a battlefield. What was supposed to be a routine negotiation quickly spiraled into one of the most hostile standoffs in WNBA history. Behind closed doors, union representatives accused Cathy Engelbart and her advisors of using the $75 million capital raise as leverage to stall progress. Instead of redistributing funds to increase salaries and improve player benefits, the commissioner's office reportedly insisted that the league still wasn't profitable enough to justify higher pay. That explanation didn't sit well with anyone in the room. Sources from inside the meetings described the atmosphere as ice cold. The players' union, emboldened by public support, refused to accept another half-measured deal. They demanded not only better pay, but full transparency on the league's finances, something Engelbart refused to grant. Her refusal fueled conspiracy theories that the $75 million had been mismanaged or quietly funneled into projects unrelated to player growth. Each meeting became more tense, more personal, and more public. What shocked fans most was how fast the players united. Normally, negotiations were marked by cautious optimism, but this time, players were prepared for confrontation. Several big names hinted at the possibility of a strike if the commissioner didn't meet their demands. Hashtags like #Fairball and #WNBA Revolt started trending, echoing across social media and sports talk shows. The idea of a WNBA lockout, something that had never happened before, suddenly seemed real. As the tension spilled into the media, Engelbart tried to calm the storm with a carefully worded statement about strategic patience and sustainable growth. Instead of soothing fans, it only made things worse. Viewers and journalists mocked her corporate tone, accusing her of being out of touch with the league's reality. Even sympathetic commentators admitted that Engelbart's inability to read the emotional temperature of her players had become her greatest weakness. Meanwhile, leaked documents began circulating online, revealing that some investors were already pulling back from future funding rounds. One section of a leaked memo claimed that continued instability within player relations had damaged the WNBA's reputation with sponsors. This revelation hit Engelbart hard. The investors she brought in to stabilize the league were now questioning whether her leadership could sustain their profits. In locker rooms and private meetings, the conversation shifted from frustration to action. Some players began quietly exploring alternative leagues, like Unrivaled or overseas contracts, as leverage. Others suggested organizing public protests or media boycotts. The pressure mounted, and with every passing week, the CBA deadline loomed larger. By late summer, the league was on the brink. Engelbart's office faced a mutiny from the very athletes who once represented her success story. Fans were choosing sides, media coverage was turning brutal, and the Players' Union was preparing for its biggest statement yet. The message was clear. If Cathy Engelbart didn't fix the system she created, the players were ready to shut the league down themselves. When Cathy Engelbart stepped onto the court during the WNBA Finals trophy ceremony, she expected applause or, at least, polite silence. Instead, she was met with a storm of boos so loud it drowned out the arena's celebration music. The cameras tried to pan away, but it was too late. The clip went viral within minutes, becoming the defining moment of her downfall. The woman who once stood as the league's symbol of progress now represented everything fans despised about corporate leadership in sports: arrogance and denial. What made that moment so powerful wasn't just the booing, it was what it represented. For years, Engelbart had sold the image of steady growth, insisting the league was moving in the right direction. But fans and players alike now saw that narrative crumble in real time. The $75 million sale that was supposed to empower the future had instead exposed the cracks in her leadership. When she smiled through the boos and tried to carry on as if nothing was wrong, the disconnect between the commissioner and her league became impossible to ignore. The backlash was instant and merciless. Clips of Engelbart's speech flooded social media with captions like "the fall of a commissioner," and "this is what happens when you betray your players." Memes comparing her to disgraced corporate executives spread fast, and major sports outlets began publishing editorials asking if her time was up. Even insiders who had once defended her strategy started to distance themselves. According to one league executive, Cathy lost the room both literally and figuratively. You can't lead a league that doesn't trust you. Things only worsened when Engelbart tried to do damage control in a post-finals interview. She dismissed the boos as passion from fans who care about the game, but her tone came off cold and rehearsed. Viewers called it one of the most tone-deaf statements in recent sports history. Instead of addressing player concerns or acknowledging the ongoing CBA crisis, she pivoted to vague promises about long-term vision and future investments. It sounded robotic, like a corporate script instead of leadership. Internally, the damage was even more severe. League sponsors began quietly reevaluating their commitments, worried that public perception could harm their brands. Team owners, especially those with NBA connections, started holding private meetings to discuss contingency plans if Engelbart's leadership became untenable. Some sources claimed there were already conversations about who could replace her before the next season began. Even former WNBA legends weighed in. A few publicly stated that while Engelbart made strides early in her tenure, she failed to adapt once the league's visibility exploded. "The game changed," one retired player said. She didn't. Those words resonated with fans who felt betrayed by the league's growing disconnect from its core audience. By this point, Engelbart was isolated. Her every statement drew skepticism, every appearance brought criticism, and every silence made her guilt seem louder. The once celebrated commissioner had become a liability, and everyone from the players to the owners knew it. But what came next would make even her worst night look calm by comparison. As a new competitor prepared to move in and challenge the league, she was barely holding together. As Cathy Engelbart's leadership crumbled in full view, another force was quietly gaining momentum behind the scenes. The new women's basketball league, known as Unrivaled, co-founded by Nafisa Collier and Brina Stewart, was turning into the very thing Engelbart's WNBA feared most: a viable alternative. At first, the WNBA treated Unrivaled like a novelty project, something that would make a little noise but fade away once the season ended. But the numbers told a different story. Investors who had once poured millions into Engelbart's vision were now redirecting their attention and their money toward Unrivaled player-first model. What made Unrivaled so threatening wasn't just its innovation, it was its transparency. The league promised open contracts, equal pay distribution, and clear revenue. Sharinga, direct contrast to the secretive financial fog surrounding Engelbart's WNBA players, who were tired of corporate excuses, suddenly saw a future where they could control their careers without being silenced by bureaucracy. Sponsorships began rolling in, and some analysts projected that within a few years, Unrivaled's valuation could surpass half of what Engelbart had sold the WNBA for. That shift sent shockwaves through the league office. According to insider reports, Multiple mid-tier WNBA players were in active talks to join Unrivaled for its upcoming season. The league's relaxed schedule, combined with its lucrative endorsement model, made it an appealing option. For many, it wasn't just about money, it was about respect. They were tired of being told to trust the process. While the commissioner's office refused to explain where the profits went, Unrivaled's founders, sensing the timing was perfect, began making strategic moves to position their league as a refuge for frustrated WNBA talent. They emphasized empowerment, fair pay, and authenticity, values the WNBA once claimed but no longer practiced under Engelbart's rule. Fans noticed too. Social media began comparing the two leagues side by side, with Unrivaled earning praise for innovation. While the WNBA drew criticism for outdated management, one viral post summed it up perfectly. Unrivaled treats players like partners. The W treats them like employees. Even sponsors began to notice the cultural shift. Brands that once courted the WNBA were now exploring deals with Unrivaled, especially after seeing the backlash Engelbart faced during the finals. To make matters worse, reports surfaced that at least 2 WNBA teams had quietly lost potential investors who decided to wait and see how. Unrivaled performed before committing to the WNBA again. For a league still struggling to prove its profitability, this was a nightmare scenario. Behind the scenes, Engelbart was reportedly furious. Sources close to the situation said she viewed Unrivaled as a distraction, undermining her progress, but others inside the league office saw it differently. They viewed it as competition born from her own failures. Every move Unrivaled made highlighted what the WNBA was doing wrong. By the time Unrivaled officially announced new funding and player partnerships, the balance of power in women's basketball had shifted. Engelbart's WNBA was no longer the only stage in town, it was the one trying to survive its own collapse. And just as she tried to rally her crumbling empire, another blow was coming from above the NBA itself. When the news finally reached the NBA headquarters in Manhattan, it was clear the situation had spiraled out of control. Adam Silver, the commissioner of the NBA and one of Cathy Engelbart's most important allies, could no longer ignore the growing disaster. For months, he had publicly defended Engelbart, framing her decisions as strategic steps toward long-term stability. But after weeks of negative headlines, fan revolts, and sponsor withdrawals, Silver's patience was running thin. The NBA owned 42% of the WNBA, and what had once been a proud sister league was now turning into a PR nightmare. Reports say Silver called an emergency meeting with key NBA owners and WNBA board members to assess the damage. The consensus was brutal. Engelbart had lost control. The boos during the finals, the financial confusion, and the CBA deadlock had eroded every ounce of trust the league once had in her. Some executives went as far as to suggest that her continued presence was actively hurting future investments. Silver, who had been instrumental in helping her get the commissioner job back in 2019, now faced a painful reality: he might have to remove the very person he once championed. Internally, discussions began about restructuring the WNBA's governance entirely. There were talks of giving NBA leadership more oversight and possibly appointing a joint management committee to stabilize operations. Silver reportedly emphasized that the league can't afford another misstep, especially with major sponsors on edge and rival leagues like Unrivaled gaining traction. It wasn't just about damage control anymore, it was about survival. Meanwhile, Engelbart attempted to fight back. In private meetings, she argued that the backlash was exaggerated by social media and that her strategy was still working in the long run. But few believed her. The numbers told a different story. Attendance had stagnated, media trust was fading, and players were openly mocking league management. Even journalists who once praised her business background were now questioning whether the WNBA's problems were more about leadership than economics. Then came the leak. Sources close to the NBA board told reporters that Adam Silver was deeply disappointed in how Engelbart had handled the investor relations and player negotiations. The quote spread like wildfire, effectively signaling that her time was almost up. Within days, analysts were speculating about who could replace her. Some suggested a former player, others a media executive who could repair the league's image. One thing was certain: change was coming. By late October, whispers of an intervention became public. The NBA was preparing to step in directly to oversee financial restructuring and stabilize negotiations with the players' union. Silver's involvement gave fans hope that accountability might finally return to the WNBA. But for Engelbart, it marked the end of her control. The commissioner, who once promised transparency, had become a cautionary tale of corporate secrecy and self-destruction. And as the league awaited Silver's next move, one haunting question lingered among fans, players, and owners alike. Was this the end of Cathy Engelbart, the beginning of the WNBA's rebirth under someone else's rule? Cathy Engelbart's downfall has become one of the most dramatic collapses in modern sports leadership. What began as a bold promise to elevate the WNBA into a billion-dollar enterprise ended in chaos filled with hidden deals, player revolts, and the loss of public trust. The $75 million sale that was supposed to secure the league's future instead exposed its weaknesses, dividing owners, alienating players, and pushing sponsors toward rival leagues like Unrivaled. Now, with Adam Silver reportedly stepping in, the WNBA stands at a crossroads between rebirth and ruin. Fans want transparency, players want fairness, and investors want stability. The question that remains isn't whether Cathy Engelbart will survive this storm. Most believe that's already decided. It's whether the WNBA can recover from the damage she leaves behind, or if her leadership marks the moment the league began to collapse under its own weight.